what's up? Hello, I hope you all are doing well. Today's review is going to be a little bit interesting because, one, I'm going to do my best to leave this to be spoiler-free, and two, if you'd like to join me at the very end, past the outro music and all that stuff, for a, how do I put this, quite rebuttal-type rant at the end, please feel free to stick around. I recently read The Cartographers, and this book I was really excited about for a variety of reasons. I had seen it pushed by a variety of publications for quite some time. It surrounds one of my favorite places, the New York Public Library, and also has like a dark academia, maps, generally people being excited about research and literature, you know, your standard academic nerd stuff, I suppose, going on in it. Bunch of people who all are running around with doctorates, like living their lives, doing their thing. Very fun. And yet, I was trying to describe how I felt about this book to Bex and just seemed to not be able to put into words how I enjoyed it, but also I didn't like it, but I did kind of like it enough to listen to the whole thing, but it wasn't good. So there's a lot happening here, and I want to get to some of those things to try and make sense of my own thoughts. Very briefly, this book is a magical realism mystery that is set in New York City, specifically at the New York Public Library, or the NYPL, as it is so frequently called every 5 seconds. And I'm going to call it the library from here on out because that is much more conversational than me frequently and repeatedly calling it the NYPL, which is what happens in the book. In dialogue, in general prose, all of the above, it is frequently and too frequently called the NYPL, and it's very unnecessary. So this book takes place there. Our lead character, Dr. Helen Young, or Nell, if you will, which is what she goes by for most of the book, is the daughter and the only daughter of Dr. Daniel Young, who is the senior head, whatever, researcher in the Maps division at the New York Public Library. Nell is unhappy in her job because she was released from her former position at the NYPL by her father, who was her boss, and upon doing so was pretty much slandered in the academic community and now works reproducing faux maps for a company that is much derided. And, you know, they're the type of ones that people weather with tea stains and you put them on your wall over your mantle or whatever, you know, art pieces, if you will, that folks would have in their house who can't afford regular old thousands or millions of dollar actual antique maps, you know, most of the population. So this is much derided by her. She hates it there. She feels that she is not using her skills as a cartographer and her degree to the best of her ability, and she also lost her dream job. A lot of other bad stuff happened when she got fired. Lo and behold, here she is, gets a call one day, her dad's been murdered. No easy way to say that. Murdered at his desk in the New York Public Library, and they call her to be like, hey, we thought you should know. In cleaning out her father's things, she finds a secret item. I'm wondering if you can guess what it is. It's a map. And it's a map that has in the past caused a whole lot of trouble. And now it is back in her life. And she discovers by wondering and poking around into why her father kept it for so many years when it caused so many problems, why the heck has he still got it? And what's it got to do with her? And why did he leave it in a place that he knew she would probably find it? Adventure, mystery, intrigue, and pretty much emotional turmoil / chaos ensues. Relationships are rekindled. There's a lot of drives up to the Catskill area of New York and beyond. Lots of upstate New York driving. Lots of people who don't trust each other. Lots of people who don't want to tell key information in the story to her, and lots of revisiting people who were relevant 30 years ago in her life that she has never actually met before. Lo and behold, this life-altering map that arrives in her possession in the wake of her father's untimely demise and throughout her grief propels her through the story with a whole variety of emotions, a lot of interesting internal dialogue about her relationship to specific other characters in the book, like her former boyfriend Felix, and also about identity. She struggles with what her identity is in some, I wouldn't say profound ways, but some interesting ways that I think could have deserved a little bit more explanation, because if they'd had some more explanation, I probably wouldn't have been as angry at some of the things that I have seen on the internet that people thought were bad. it's a pretty decent hook, right? Everything is like going terribly until one day this one thing turns it around and now I have a mystery to solve. Great. Love it. The issues I had with this book come from the magical realism element. And I think in reading this, it had all the makings of something that I should love, but the thing that I could not get my head around, and this comes back to my inability to determine what exactly is on the approved criteria for Leslie to read a fantasy book and enjoy it, the magical realism of this did not work for me. At some point in this book, there are physical maps, paper ones that you unfold and don't, bring up on your phone, physical maps that are used to help get drivers of cars to a certain place. Those physical maps, by having them in your possession, creates something in the world, and I won't tell you what, but that defies the laws of physics. It is the magic part of these maps. They are somehow both completely mundane and also magical. And it is the magical part that I could not be okay with. The more it was introduced and the more people were like, you know what? You're never gonna believe it if I told you, but it's true. The more I just wanted to just scream while I was listening to this. Everything was going not so well, but okay up until this happened. And I wanted it to work out. I totally wanted to buy into the fact that, all right, I've got this map that was made by perfectly non-magic human beings, and they just discovered it, and it does this incredible thing, and cool, I'm cool with it, I'm gonna buy into it. Could not buy into it the entire time, and it kept happening, and every time I was like, this goes against all of like the factual, concrete, academic stuff that is going on in all of the other parts of this book, and we're just all sitting here okay with the fact that this is magical. So lo and behold, we discover once again that magical realism does not work for Les. I definitely thought that was a challenge that book couldn't overcome, particularly in the ways that the main characters engaged with the magic of it, or the realistic / non-realistic attitude of it when it starts to affect something that's been part of your everyday life for so long, and suddenly you discover that that place in your life has been changed by magic. It's hard to deal with. The characters did not deal with it well. I'm not surprised. It's understandable. They did not deal with it well. But eventually they just all like come around to it, which I guess would happen and does happen in books where everyone is blown away by something that is different than originally meets the eye. So that was a bit of a plot issue for me. There are probably some other plot holes. I've heard other reviews talk about them. I don't think it's necessary to get into all of them except for the most egregious. My biggest issue with this book was the way I think that it was written, because I liked the way that it was done, but it did throw you off. And it's something where I'm very glad, once again, that I've listened to the audio, because on the page, I don't think it would have worked out as well. The audio in this is narrated by one person who does both Nell and Felix, and then the rest of them, when there are people that are telling their stories, they do them with different narrators. So it's a cast that performs the book. There's a lot of this book that involves Nell learning about her parents' past and learning about the adventure they went on one big summer 30 years ago, and how all of her parents' friends, none of whom she has ever met until this book takes place, came to be friends and came to be colleagues and academic partners. She learns how they were students together, how they wanted to take on this big project after graduation together once they got their doctorates, and how she was, so important in their life because she was 3 years old at the time that so much of this was going on. Most of the exposition in this book is retelling. She needs to be told what has happened in the past, but it's told in a way that the author wants to show you what's going on. So let me give you an example. Nell has to go and see a character called Ramona, and this is the first moment where I was like, wait, what? What's happening? Mostly because the voices that do Nell and Ramona's parts were similar enough that I wasn't sure I was hearing someone different. So Nell goes to find Ramona, and she asks Ramona a series of questions. Ramona does not want to answer because, there's a mystery going on. And when Ramona finally does answer, it's in the form of a story. So the perspective shifts from third-person Nell perspective to Ramona telling a story. So you're getting something along the lines of, Nell stepped closer as she shut the door. "Tell me," she said. And then Ramona will start to speak, and Ramona is speaking to Nell, but the whole thing is this wall of dialogue as she's just telling a story. The entire thing is just Ramona talking for an average sized chapter. She's just talking about the past. But the tense of it is also like you're in the past, and meanwhile she's also talking to Nell. So you get the entire chapter as just each of these characters that she encounters, that Nell encounters, is telling her a story. Actually, do you know what it's closest to? It's closest to the time in Order of the Phoenix when Hagrid comes back from his trip and he's got the giant dragon stake on his face, right? And that chapter is called Hagrid's Tale, and he pretty much just tells them straight through the whole chapter, the whole thing is a story, and he's just recounting what has happened in the past. But in that instance, not to praise that author for anything more recent, that particular chapter has interjections from the other characters who are listening to him tell the story. In this instance, in the Cartographers, this is just Ramona or Frances or Eve just being like, here's what happened. And the whole chapter is just them delivering a story. It's interesting because Nell doesn't get the chance to ask follow-up questions until we're back in her perspective. So you're not actually seeing how she is absorbing the story that they've told until after the story is over. You're not getting any of her reactions. You're not getting any of that. You're just getting the person telling a story. That was a curious choice. I liked it. I enjoyed it. I don't know that it was successful. I do not know that that was a successful choice. There were just other moments as well in the way that this was done and plotted that didn't sit well with me. I knew probably a third of the way through who the person that was committing the problematic crimes was. I knew exactly who it was going to be. And I was super justified and vindicated when it turned out to be that person. I wonder, though, why no one caught on. There were a lot of moments in this book where I just kind of rolled my eyes and said, why is no one catching up? Why are we not catching up? This is very easy. I can see what's happening. I've got the same information that you do. Why? Why can't you figure this out? Yes, all of these characters are going through grief at the consistent murdering of people in their lives, which is probably a good reason why. Not that it's talked about. But I would have preferred to see them be a little more aware of their surroundings and sort of, like, look up. The answer is right in front of you a lot of the time. I really liked a lot of these characters. There's a whole sort of cabal of folks from Nell's past who were friends with her parents, and they all have interesting voices and roles to play. All of their motivations throughout the course of the book are very young. Their motivations are definitely situated in the past when, like, the thing happened. And they remain so throughout. So if they are just graduating from their PhD programs, assuming that they haven't skipped any time in between a traditional collegiate and graduate experience, that puts them mid to late 20s when all of, like, #the thing is going on. So they're working with that age level of motivation for the entire story, which is fine. They do grow up and get old and do different things and go off in different directions, but they maintain this insistent wariness about this one character the entire time, which seems a little bit unfounded. At some points I wanted to be like, if we all just let this go and didn't care anymore, then it wouldn't be a problem. But I can see the way that the mystery was plotted, that they all needed to be super concerned about it, even though, looking back, you could have just let this one individual do whatever they were going to do and no one else needed to be involved. I think what I'm trying to say here is this is an interesting idea, and I'm not so sure it was executed as best as it possibly could have been. I have seen an actually staggering number of reviews of this book that are not particularly positive. I hope that I have tried to cast it for you here in not the worst light, because if you are interested in a magical realism, vague mystery, dark academia type of book, and you really just want a great story and don't want to have to care about specifics, this would totally work. If you're someone who's going to get very pedantically hung up on tiny impracticalities and missteps like me, this is going to bother you. If you like multiple narrators and a shifting in perspective, I would also give this a try. I don't think this is worth not reading. I just think that there are demonstrably better ways to have executed what could have been a really fabulous plot. Having said that, if you have read this book, I would love to know your thoughts down in the comments. Please feel free to leave them. If you want to stick around for a rebuttal rant that just needs to come out of my mouth, please do stick around. As always, I hope you're having lovely weeks and lovely lives, and we'll see you very soon. So I'll try and keep this short. Like I mentioned before, I've read and seen some other reviews of this book floating around, and one of the very nitpicky things that these reviews are choosing to harp on, which probably in another life or on a different day, I would also harp on this. But this particular instance has me a little irritated because these folks are choosing to ask the question, does this author even know what a cartographer is? Because the author consistently calls all of the major characters in this story cartographers throughout the book. She refers to Nell as a cartographer throughout the book. Nell goes on an emotional identity journey about being a cartographer and, having all these other things in her life and working in all of these other jobs, but at heart is a cartographer. And I'm just here to say that it is perfectly okay for the author to have done that, because in Western society, we don't apply for jobs. We apply for job titles. And each of those things impacts our identity separately. Yes, in an institution as big and famed as the NYPL, you would hope that the people working at that institution, particularly in a division that handles rare, antique, precious objects such as maps in the map division, that those folks would be trained in how to care for and conserve objects of that nature. I would also hope that people in those positions would know enough about the objects that they're handling, especially if they have titles like researcher in their name, that they would be able to convey some of that very specialized education and knowledge to other people who come in and have questions about those objects. So yes, archivists don't always need to know about the content of the things that they are archiving. In your standard MLS, Master of Library Science, MLIS, Master of Library and Information Science type of degrees that accredit you to work in archival settings, fine. I don't care if the content is about, old chairs. But if you don't know about old chairs and you're just conserving the blueprints that someone has made for creating old antique chairs, okay, you're no help to me, right? Like, you can get the material down and you can show me how to appropriately look at it without damaging it. But if I have a question about the design, about the measurement, about the type of wood, you probably can't help me unless you are also an expert in antique and old chair making. So in an institution like the New York Public Library, it is fully acceptable for people who are not out in the field doodling mountains every day and being like, oh, I think I'll put this road going up over here in the left-hand corner. According to my calculations in architecture, this looks correct. It was a very infantilized version of what an actual cartographer does in my representation there, but you get what I'm saying. Just because I'm not out making maps every day doesn't mean I'm not a cartographer. Cartographer, which is the job, not the job title, is still part of my identity if I'm a cartographer. So Nell, her father, the guy who's the head of the map division in this book, all cartographers, even though they're not drawing maps every day. And I would hope that those are the type of people that the actual New York Public Library has running their map division. Because yes, all of those materials should be appropriately cared for and conserved. That's great. I 100% want that. I want somebody with archival experience and conservation experience and those type of certifications and education to be directing that. But if they don't know what to tell me about an ancient map, when that's the information that I'm looking for my research, they're useless to me. You need to have both. And moreover, it is okay to be both or to not be one of the other. It's understandable, I think, that most people who are working with antique materials like maps and have that type of specialized education probably also know how to conserve them. Maybe not to the extent that an archivist does, but they probably have some idea about what's necessary there. And I know of a number of institutions that are headed up by someone without an MLS, without an MLIS, without archivist type degrees. And those institutions do just fine, because the people there are still experts at what they do despite not maybe doing that thing every day. If you are going to only allow someone to be called something if they practice the thing from the field, then we've got a lot of problems. Superintendents of public school districts, I would argue that those people are educators. But if you want to say that an educator is only someone who's teaching in a classroom, then who's running our school districts? You know what I mean? By that token, all of these fancy science folks who get asked to speak at graduate school commencement ceremonies, lauded Dr. So-and-so of whatever, famed biochemist, right? Dr. So-and-so of whatever has probably been retired for the last 20 years and he's on the lecture circuit. He hasn't been in a lab in a long time. But we introduce him and we know him as a biochemist. He might be retired, but that's what he is. That's part of his identity. We're okay with calling him that because he has the skills, education, and expertise in order to work in that field. So, to all of the people that are asking whether the author of this book knows what the word cartographer means, yeah, she 100% does. It's not a constant misuse throughout the book. All of those people that you think are cartographers actually are, because identity is in the eye of the beholder. It's also kind of in the eye of your credentials, but you see what I mean. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.